Thanks a lot for having me. It's a great pleasure to be part of this event, finally. I see clap emojis and party emojis. Awesome, thank you. Yeah, my name is Manuel. I'm a front-end developer from Vienna, and I work for the city of Vienna. I work there as a front-end dev, so my job is to write accessible HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That's what I do mostly for the city of Vienna, but I also do some kind of, let's call it accessibility consulting. So sometimes I answer questions about web accessibility, do small audits for the city, something like that. Besides my work for the city of Vienna, I'm also a freelancer, and I don't develop too much anymore as a freelancer. I mostly do consulting for larger companies or larger institutions, and I give workshops and I do audits. I'm part of WACA, which is the Web Accessibility Certificate Austria, and there I perform accessibility audits of websites. That's what I do. And I really like my job. I enjoy my job a lot. And this is why I attend events like these and also give talks at events like these. And I even organize events. So if you've ever heard of the webclerks meetup or conference, I'm one of the organizers. Yeah, and I also give talks, and I also write articles on my personal site and on other websites because I just love this job so much. And 3 years ago, I conducted an experiment, and I wrote about this experiment on my website. And this article got shared a lot because it was a bit controversial, and even people from Google contacted me, and pretty much all the major accessibility testing tool providers also got in touch with me. And because it was an interesting experiment, and I wrote about it, and last year I decided to turn this article into a talk and present what I did and what I found out. And this is what will be happening in the next 25 minutes or so. Let me just quickly share my screen. I hope that you can see the title slide. Yes, great. So the title of the article is Building the Most Inaccessible Site Possible with a Perfect Lighthouse Score. And this is what I'm going to present to you tonight. So the experiment was the following. I built a simple page, and I tried to make this page as inaccessible as possible while maintaining a perfect accessibility testing score. To quickly explain that, in Google Chrome, there is a built-in testing tool called Lighthouse. And usually that's something that developers do to perform certain tests on a website. You can open the DevTools and press a button, and then Lighthouse will run a bunch of tests on your site. It will check the performance, the search engine optimization, accessibility, general best practices, and if you are dealing with a progressive web app, it will also run some PWA tests. This is built in Lighthouse, and the way Lighthouse in Chrome, the way Lighthouse works is it performs a bunch of tests, and then it gives you a score between 0 and 100. And if you get the score of 100, it means that you've passed all the tests. And if you get a score of 0, it means that you didn't pass any tests. I don't believe that that happens, but if you get a low score, they will tell you what's wrong and usually also how you can fix it. And yes, so my idea was I'm going to build a website that's completely inaccessible, but has a perfect score. Or actually, I wanted to find out if this works. And that's what I did. The thing is, my audience usually is a audience of mostly developers. So this talk is also intended for developers. It's very technical. There's a lot of code, but I will try to explain everything because I believe that not all of you are developers. Some are. But if you have any questions, just write them down in Slido or the Miro board or whatever, or in the chat. We will have enough time after the talk to answer these questions and also discuss the things that I told you. Yes. So I would say let's get started, if that's okay with you. All right. So what you can see on the screen here is a fictional tweet by a fictional Twitter user, and it says, yes, we did it, all green party emojis. And below that, you can see a screenshot of Lighthouse, the built-in testing tool in Google Chrome that I mentioned. And there are 4 categories: performance, accessibility, best practices, and SEO. And for each category, you see the number 100 in a green circle indicating that this site passed all the tests for each category. And this person, this fictional person, shared this, and because they were proud of their achievement. Now, you might have seen this on Twitter or on LinkedIn or any other social media site, or maybe you have posted this yourself or a similar tweet. Now, just for a second or two, I want you to think I want you to think about what you feel or what you think when you see someone post something like that. I will tell you what I feel. What I feel is, this is awesome. This is great. I really like when people do that. I like when people post these screenshots because it means that they didn't just build a website and put it online. No, they build a website and then they ran these tests, and they probably didn't get a perfect score in each category. So they did some optimization, and then they ran another test and another test up to the point where they got these perfect scores. And this is a good thing because they care about their website, about these scores, and ultimately they probably also care about their users, because in the end it is, or it should be, all about users. But there's also a lot of criticism. There are people who say these numbers are just numbers. Just because Lighthouse says that you have a score of 100 in performance doesn't mean that you have built a super fast website. Or just because you have 100 points in SEO doesn't mean that it will be like the first results on the first page in Google. And this is also true. So for me, it's both. It's a good thing to share your achievements. You should be proud because getting perfect scores in some of these categories is actually pretty hard. I would say that getting 100 in the best practices score is usually quite easy, but getting 100 in performance, it's not that easy. At least I have a hard time with our websites because Lighthouse usually doesn't test on the best possible network connection, but it tests on like I think a good 3G connection or a slow 3G connection. So it's not that easy. So it's a good thing to share these achievements, but at the same time, we have to remember that these numbers are in fact just numbers. So back in 2019, shortly before I wrote this article, my friend Zach Lederman, he posted on Twitter, free blog post idea, how to build the slowest website possible with a perfect Lighthouse score. And obviously I liked this idea. So I started thinking, okay, how can I make a site really slow? But like I said, making a slow website without the Lighthouse or Chrome noticing is pretty hard. But then shortly after, Vadim, another friend, he posted, that would be a wonderful read. Here's one for an accessibility audit. And next to his message, there is a image tag in HTML. And there's a source attribute, which you use to point to the file that gets displayed in the browser. And there's also an alt attribute, which you use to describe the image or what's in the image. You do that for assistive technology. So for example, for people who use assistive technology like a screen reader. So usually you describe the image, but Vadim just took the file name and used it for the alt attribute. So this is obviously wrong because knowing the file name of the image isn't useful at all. But this passes accessibility tests because these tests don't care what's in the alt attribute as long there is an attribute. And obviously I liked it even more. So I started thinking and I did all kinds of experimenting, and I spent a lot of time, and I came up with this. So I built a page. I didn't build the whole website. So a page is enough, and it's a very simple page. It just has a heading, a few paragraphs, a link, a list, and a simple form. And this is what I used for my experiment. So I built this page, and this page is simply beautiful. It's a perfect page. It's as perfect as it can get. Why? Because it's super fast. You can't make it faster. There's no CSS, no JavaScript, no images. It's plain HTML this is the fastest site possible you can build. Maybe, okay, if you add a service worker and you make it offline, make it work offline, it will be faster the second time you open it, but this is as fast as it can get. And it's also accessible because I'm using semantic HTML, I'm using headings and paragraphs and lists, so this just works for pretty much everyone. And it's simple. It's just a fantastic site. And I used this for my test. And I tried to ruin it without Lighthouse noticing. And yeah, I will show you how I did that. Before I do that, and this is really important, a disclaimer. This talk is not absolutely 100% not about Lighthouse. It's also not about Xcore, the engine that powers Lighthouse. It's also not about any other testing tool. So this is really about people like you and me who build stuff for the web and who are responsible for making stuff accessible and also for testing stuff and how we deal with the tools that we are using to make accessible products. So it's absolutely about you and me and how we deal with these things. It's not about the tools. The tools are amazing. I use them almost every day. I'm a big fan of the people who build these tools, and yeah, like I said, now I know some of them because they got in touch with me because of this thing that I did here. And there's another disclaimer. This talk is, I would say, 98% sarcasm. So I just wanted to make clear from the very beginning that what will follow now is pretty much just sarcasm. There are like two things that are true or that I would actually recommend. Everything else is just over exaggeration. Okay, so like I said, I saw this tweet and then I built this site and I did all kinds of experimenting and researching and testing, and wow, I spent so much time with this page and with this experiment and with testing tools, and I learned so much. I actually learned so much that I was able to come up with my own principles. So you might have heard of things like progressive enhancement or graceful degradation or inclusive design. Forget about all of that. That's pure nonsense. The only thing that you have to care about is this new thing that I came up with, which is progressive degradation. And here's how progressive degradation works. If you apply progressive degradation to a website or design or any other product, you make sure that with every line of code you write or with every click you make the experience for the user worse. This is the whole point of progressive degradation, and we are going to apply this principle now on my still pretty perfect page. So the first thing I want to do now is I want to add complexity to this site. Like I said, it's super simple. It's the best possible thing you can get is an HTML file because it works in the browser. It will work, I don't know, on command line based browsers. It will work with assistive technology. It's just perfect. And it's super simple. And I want to make it complex because we developers, we love complexity. We love to configure Webpack. We love to use JavaScript frameworks for pretty much anything that could go online. And yeah, let's do that. So the first thing that I do is I select the body. The body is the element in HTML that wraps the whole page. It contains the whole content of the site, and I put the hidden attribute on the body. And this is how the site looks like with this attribute in place. It's gone. It's just a blank screen. And now I could stop here. That's it. I run a Lighthouse test. It will give me 100 points because the hidden attribute, using the hidden attribute is just fine. And I can go home. But I didn't want to make it too easy on myself. So I made this rule that technically I still have to show something on the screen for this experiment to work. So let me revoke that, but I'm not going to remove the attribute. I will add a style sheet to this page, and I'm putting a class on the body element, and in the style sheet, I'm setting display block. Now, the page looks exactly the same like it did before, but now CSS is a dependency. So if for some reason CSS can't load, the site won't display anything. Now, those of you who are developers might think, okay, why would that happen? Why wouldn't CSS load? And I can tell you, as someone who sleeps in their van when they're on vacation in Italy or Greece, that this happens. So if you're in the middle of nowhere in, let's say, Italy, for example, and you try to access a website and try to book a ferry or a bus, whatever, you're happy if just anything makes it over the network. And sometimes it happens that no assets load and you just get the plain HTML. And if this happens on our side now, there's no content, which is pretty amazing. But okay, that's easy. Let's add some more complexity. So instead of adding this class manually, the loaded class on the body elements, I will use JavaScript for that. So I'm removing a class again. I'm adding a script element to my page. And in this script, I'm selecting the body and I'm adding the class via JavaScript. So it still looks the same. It's the same thing. But the difference now is that if JavaScript doesn't load, the class won't be applied and the CSS won't kick in. So, and this is way more likely that JavaScript doesn't load. Some people don't activate JavaScript in their browsers for security reasons. Sometimes there is, I don't know, a bug. There might be a not working connection to some external script, or maybe an ad blocker is causing issues. There are reasons why JavaScript wouldn't load. Okay. Now, so this is the first thing that I did. I just added some complexity. I just wanted to make things a bit more interesting. And now I will do my first test. So what I did here is I right-clicked in the page and I selected Inspect Element, or in German Element untersuchen. And then DevTools open up, and in the top, on the very top of DevTools, you see some tabs, and one of them is called Lighthouse. And if you switch to this tab, you can select categories and click on Generate Report. And this is what I'm doing now. So I'm clicking this Generate Report button, and I only selected the accessibility category because I don't care about the other stuff right now. And now I get a perfect score. Fine. I mean, okay, that was easy. Like I was just warming up. Just you know, some basic HTML, some basic JavaScript and CSS stuff, nothing too special. So I didn't expect Lighthouse to detect anything here. But I would say it's time to get dirty. Let's get like really dirty. Like let's get deep into progressive degradation, and let's try to exclude screen reader users. A screen reader is a software that mostly, but not exclusively, blind people use. Also, sometimes people with learning disabilities. And this software reads the content on a page, and then it outputs the content as audio. So it actually reads the content on the page, or it sends the information to a braille display, for example. And yeah, this is a software mostly blind people rely on, and there are many different ways of excluding blind people. And I would actually say that most websites are doing this. So most websites are inaccessible. And the easiest way I found was this. You can use the ARIA hidden attributes and put it on the body element. Now, I'm smart, I'm a good developer, and I've been doing this for, I don't know, more than 13 years. I know that you can't just put the ARIA hidden attribute on the body, because there is a rule in Lighthouse that would say, no, this is not allowed. So I just added a div, another element in HTML, and I wrapped all the content on the page in this div, and I put the attribute on this div. This is fine. It's just not allowed on the body. And that's it. So what ARIA hidden does is that it removes the element and all its children from the so-called accessibility tree. Let me just quickly explain what the accessibility tree is. So if you have an HTML document, it contains all kinds of elements and text notes and references to files and so on. If you open this in the browser constructs the so-called DOM, the document object model. So this is a representation of your HTML document specifically for the browser. It contains all the elements, and it also says, here's this element, it's a heading, it has a child element, and this element has these attributes, and then you can use JavaScript and modify the DOM and so on. And similar to the DOM, there's also another representation of the HTML document in the browser called the accessibility tree. And this representation is specifically for assistive technology. So it contains all the nodes that are accessible to the software, and it also contains children in certain states. So for example, if you have a button, there would be a node called button, and it has the button text, and if the button is, I don't know, expanded, it will also include a specific attribute that communicates this to assistive technology. And if you put ARIA hidden on an element, you remove it from the accessibility tree. And if this element happens to be the parent element that contains all the other elements, this means that everything is removed from the accessibility tree. Pretty easy, and that's it. Let's just run another test. This should be fine. Let's see, Lighthouse is warming up. Oh, no, shit. What does it say? A score of 94, and it says, ARIA hidden true elements contain focusable descendants. Focusable descendants within an ARIA hidden true element prevent those, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so the problem here is that it's fine to use ARIA hidden, but if an element that has this attribute contains children that are focusable, it's not okay. And we have 3 elements that are focusable. And focusable means that you can reach them using the keyboard. So if you press the tab key, you can access this element. And these are usually interactive elements. So elements like a link, an input field, a select, the radio button, the checkbox, a scrollable div in some browsers, a button, an iframe, stuff like that. So all the interactive stuff is also reachable with the keyboard by default. And this is an issue for Lighthouse. Now, let's try to deal with that. So this is the first thing, the link at the very top of the page, and this is focusable. And fixing this was super easy because, as mentioned earlier, I'm an auditor, so it's part of my job to check websites. So I visit websites and I look at the code, and then I tell them what sucks about their code, and I see a lot of bad things. I actually see so many bad things. I have a website called htmhell.dev where I collect these things. So I know a lot of bad patterns. So instead of using the href attribute, which you use to point to a specific source on another site or on the same site, I'm using the onClick event and the location.href method in JavaScript. So it kind of does the same thing. So if you click this link or this A element, it will bring you to the website, but it's not a proper link anymore. It's just a so-called placeholder link with a click event in JavaScript. And since this link doesn't have an href attribute, it's also not focusable. So problem solved, I would say. The next thing is the form. In this form, we have an input field, a simple text input field, and a button, and both are focusable. And also dealing with this is easy. So we just replace the input field and the button with a div. A div is a generic container. It's an element that has no semantic meaning. So it doesn't communicate any information to assistive technology. And in order to make our fake input field div thingy editable, we can add the content editable element in HTML. This will allow users to add content in this div. Of course, what's missing here is the styling. So the link, the input field, and the button come with default styles. And since we are not using these elements anymore, they're gone. So we have to add some custom CSS, but this is fine. Okay, yeah. Now, I know that some developers are also here tonight, and you might be thinking, Manuel, I don't know. I mean, this is fine, but this is not dry. Dry means don't repeat yourself. And it's also not very sustainable, because what happens if there is, I don't know, a content management system and there is a WYSIWYG field and editors can just add links? They probably won't add a link like this one. They might add one like these, and then the site is accessible again. And of course, we don't want to make an accessible website. And you are absolutely right. So instead of doing that, you can just use JavaScript. So what these 4 lines of code do is that you select all the interactive elements on the page. So all the elements that are listed earlier. And in this code example here, I'm just using the input, the button, and the A, but you would have to complete this list. And then you iterate over this list and you set the attribute, the tab index attribute to -1. This removes the ability to be focusable from elements, or actually the ability to be tabbable. So you can't use the keyboard anymore. Yeah. This is way more sustainable. So if someone adds a new focusable element, the script will make sure that these elements aren't focusable anymore. So let's run another test. Fingers crossed. And perfect. So with just a few lines of HTML and with some minor editing, we've excluded a whole group of users being able to use our website. So screen readers users would just get no information out of this website. Awesome. Now, the next user group I want to deal with is keyboard users. I've talked a lot about keyboard usage, and now we want to exclude all of them. And all you have to do is to add these 3 lines of CSS. What happens here is that I select all items on the page in their focus state. So this is the state that you get when you press the tab key and you focus a focusable element. And I set outline to none. Since we have designers here, I'm pretty sure that at some point you told the developer, please remove this ugly blue line or this ugly dotted line. I don't want to see this. Our users get distracted by this ugly thing. At least I've heard this sentence a lot of times in the past, at least. And this is how you do it. You just select all the items and you set outline to none. And what happens here is that if users press the tab key, they won't see anymore where on the page they are. So the visible focus indicator that tells people if they are on the link or the button is gone. Here's an example. So I will show you a short video now of this page. And in the first few seconds, you will see how there is a salmon colored outline on the link and the input field in the button as I'm pressing the tab key. And then I will switch to another version of the site without any focus indicator. So I'm pressing tab now, and you can see that it's clearly visible where on the page I am. And now I'm still pressing tab, but you don't see where I am. So the first version has custom styling, and the second one has these 3 lines that I showed earlier. And actually, you can see something happening. You can see that in the input fields, the caret, the text indicator is blinking when I focus the input fields, which means that you don't see where on the page you are, but items are still accessible. And of course, we don't want that. So JavaScript can help us with that. All you have to do is to add these 3 lines to the existing script file. And what's happening here is that I'm adding a key down event to the document, and I'm preventing default. And this means that if you press, I don't know, tab, for example, nothing will happen. If you press enter, also nothing, because I'm just preventing the default behavior of each button, which is pretty awesome. And I have to tell you something. Progressive degradation is one of the, I would say, you know what, it's the best web principle, because sometimes you make sure that you make the experience worse for some users, and at the same time you're also making it worse for other users, because progressive degradation is just so perfect. And in this specific example, I tried to make the experience worse for keyboard users, but at the same time I also disabled the ability to zoom into the site, because if you press Command or Control plus, you can't zoom anymore. The site won't get larger because I've prevented default key behavior for every single key. Simply beautiful. All right, I would say let's just run another test, 3 lines of CSS and some JavaScript, and Lighthouse is checking, and still a perfect score. Awesome. All right. Now I would like to deal with one of the most privileged users, mouse users. And excluding mouse users is also fairly easy. Again, we just need 4 lines of CSS. And what I'm doing here is that I'm selecting all the items in their default states and their hover state, and I'm setting cursor to none. And cursor none is to mouse users what outline none is to keyboard users. So this just hides the cursor. You can click stuff if you want to, but you don't see where on the page you are because the mouse is gone. This is one way of fucking with users, and another way is called the max bug offset, or actually the bug offset. This is a technique coined by my good friend Max Böck, and this is how it works. So you take the default cursor, you open it in some image editing tool, and then you increase the width of the image by 100 pixels. And you align the cursor to the right. And then you save this new image. And in CSS, you replace the default cursor with this custom cursor. And the thing here is the area where you click, so the hit area is always in the top left, but the cursor is on the very right. So users will think that they're clicking where the cursor is, but actually they're clicking 100 pixels to the left. And this is also, again, a lot of beautiful techniques that I'm showing you tonight. And here's an example. So here's a paragraph with 2 links and 3 buttons. And you can see as I'm hovering the first button, nothing happens. As I'm hovering the second button, now the focus, the hover styles for the first button are visible. As I'm hovering the third button, the hover styles for the second button are visible, and so on. And when I try to hover the link, nothing happens. And when I click 100 pixels to the right, or when I'm with the mouse 100 pixels to the right, you can see hover styles. The thing is, this is really irritating and it's super evil, but at some point users will figure out what's going on. They will, people are smart. They will learn at some point that they just have to click 100 pixels to the right if they want to achieve their goal, because clicking is still possible. And I don't want that. So we just add some more CSS. We select the body and we set pointer events to none. The pointer events property in CSS allows you to disable all pointer events, so clicking on elements. And if you put it on the body element, this will be propagated to all the child items of the body. So if you click something now, nothing happens. And if you really don't care about your users and you want to make sure that this works in pretty much all the browsers, so even in browsers that don't support the point events property, I have a polyfill for you. And this is how it works. It checks if point events is accessible in a browser. If yes, it just returns the function, so nothing happens. If not, it adds a click event to the document and it prevents default again. So this will make sure that even if the property is not supported, clicking won't be possible. And you know what? Actually, I like this technique much better. It's JavaScript is just a much stronger and more masculine language than CSS. And you know what? Just forget about point events in CSS. Just use JavaScript in the first place. JavaScript is just so much stronger. It's the better language. Which brings me to the second principle I came up with. So the first thing is progressive degradation. And the second thing I came up with is the rule of most power. And the rule of most power says that for any given task, always use the strongest language. So for example, if you want to add a paragraph to a page, don't use the P element in HTML, use canvas in JavaScript. Okay, yeah, let's run another test and see what's happening. So far, we have excluded screen reader users, keyboard users, and mouse users, and we still have a perfect Lighthouse score. I don't know how involved you are in the web development community, but the web development community is amazing. So if you want to ruin the experience for your users, there will always be someone in the community who will help you with that. And I asked my Twitter friends, hey, how can I make this website even more inaccessible? And Alvaro helped me. He said, hey, dude, it's fine, but mobile users can still select the text and copy and paste it somewhere else to read it. So you can't click and use the keyboard, but you can touch and select the text, which sucks, of course. And he said to avoid that and make the content even more inaccessible, remove user selection for all elements. And he actually also provided me with the code. So I select all the items on the page and I set user select to none, which now makes it also not selectable. Pretty awesome. Okay, the next thing that I dealt with is a thing called Windows High Contrast Mode. So if you are a Windows user, you can switch your default theme in Windows to a very high contrasting theme. And for example, what you can see on the screen now is Windows in a dark theme. So everything, all the backgrounds are black, the outlines are white, and the text is yellow, in a bright yellow color. So very high contrasting. And there are all kinds of different themes that you can choose in high contrast mode. And as you can see, this doesn't just work on a website, but for the whole operating system in Windows. The awesome thing about that is I can actually query that in CSS, so I can react to that. I know if a user has Windows high contrast mode enabled, I can provide them with custom CSS. There's a media feature called MS High Contrast, and if it's active, I can provide my own CSS. So for example, I could select all items on the page and set the color to black. Why would I want to do that? Well, if the background color is black and the text color is black, then everything is black and you can't see anything on the screen. The thing is, this unfortunately is not exclusive enough, because there aren't just high contrasting mode with dark colors, but also with light colors. So you can select a light high contrast mode with a white background color, for example, or users can actually pick their own colors and create their own theme. So this will work for some users, but not all of them. Fortunately, there is a thing in CSS called system colors. And system colors are keywords that map to specific elements in user interface. So for example, if I use color is window, or if I set the color property to window, it will always match the background color. So if the background color is blue, the color will be blue. If the background color is red, the color will be red. And if the background color is black, the text color will be black. And this is how the site looks like in Windows high contrast mode. So for people with low vision, the website won't be usable anymore. So on the screen, you can see a screenshot of Windows high contrast mode, and the whole viewport is black except for a white outline on the input field and the button. And when I wrote that and when I published my article, I actually expected Facebook to knock on my door and hire me, because this was just so evil. So I expected they would want someone like that to work for them, but unfortunately, yeah, they didn't hire me. I just guessed this wasn't evil enough for them. Well, anyways, let's run another test and see what's happening in Lighthouse. And I can tell you, this is a safe 100 here. Perfect. Okay, what's left? Windows high contrast mode. Now I would say it's time to deal with sighted people. So the thing is, you can't interact with the site anymore. So no keyboard, no mouse, no screen reader, no selecting, no zooming. But if you're sighted and you open the website, you can still read the content, and I don't want that. And like I said earlier in the beginning, I didn't want to make it too easy on myself. So using hidden in HTML or display none in CSS or visibility hidden or opacity 0 is too easy, like, removing all the content. I technically still want to show something on the screen, and that's why I set the opacity to 0.03. So technically, there's still something on the screen, but it's not readable. So I don't know if you can see that, but there are some shades of gray. You can slightly see some of the text in the list and so on. So technically, there's still something on the screen, but yeah, I don't believe that anyone has eyes that good. So let's run another test. And oh yeah, okay. 94 again. And it says background and foreground colors do not have a sufficient contrast ratio. Now the thing is, 3 years ago, when I made this experiment, this worked. This wasn't an issue. And then sometime later, suddenly they included this test for opacity. And I like to believe that they did it because of me and because of my article. I don't know if this is true, probably they didn't, but that's the story I will tell my kids, that they did it because of me. So unfortunately, you can't use opacity here or low opacity. It's like using a very low contrasting color on a background color. And at this point, I was like, okay, shit, how am I going to solve this? Because if I can't use any of those properties, how can I trick Lighthouse into not noticing that I'm pretty much almost hiding the content? And like I said earlier, I'm a professional developer for 14 years now, and I know my CSS. And I discovered that you can use the filter property in CSS and the blur function. And you use the blur function to blur content on the page. And I will do it now. You can see I'm increasing the value and it gets blurrier and blurrier. and I'm increasing it up to a point where the content is just so blurry that you can't see anything anymore. And if I run a test now, you will see that I get a perfect score. So using a very high blur value will work here. And while I discovered that, I also noticed that there is an opacity function in CSS for the filter property. So similar to the opacity property, there is an opacity function. And I just tried that and it works. So it's pretty much the same thing as using opacity, but Lighthouse doesn't notice it. And I was surprised, I have to say. So I did some research, I didn't find anything, and then I filed an issue on GitHub in the Xcore GitHub repository. Xcore is the engine that powers Lighthouse and other testing tools. And I told them, hey, I did some experimenting. I found out that your tools don't notice this. And they responded quickly, and they said, yeah, we kind of know dealing with filter is pretty tough. Do you have some kind of practical or like realistic example where this was an issue? And I was like, nah, I just wrote a stupid article. I don't have a practical example. And they said, okay, fine, then we'll just wait if someone gives us something they can work with. So if you have ever had issues with the filter property and accessibility in the past, or if you have it in the future, yeah, report this to the team. They're really helpful. But yeah, for now, they didn't deal with this because it's just too complicated to deal with the filter property because there's a lot of, I don't know, magic happening in the browser. And actually other testing tool developers confirmed that. Like I said, I'm in contact with most of them. So they also told me that they can't check that with their tools. Okay, so like I said earlier, my target audience for my talks is usually web developers. And you know, web developers know their ways of extracting content from a website. So if they don't see anything, they can still, I don't know, right click and select view page source, and then they can look at the code and they can still read the content. And of course, I don't want that. So what I did here is I took all the text on the page and I converted it to so-called HTML entities. Entities are just a way of adding special characters to a site. So for example, if you want to show the copyright sign or trademark or an, I don't know, right arrow or something like that, you can use a special code. And also each letter in the alphabet has a special code, an entity. And that's what I did. And I don't believe that anyone can read entities fluently. So yeah, it's just not possible to read this. Awesome. Yeah, that's it. Let's run another test. The website isn't interactive. You can't read the contents on the page. There is technically still something on the page. And you also can't look at the code. Now, back in 2019, I picked Lighthouse because Lighthouse is the most well-known tool, I would say. It's well-known because most people probably use it for their performance tests, and they, even if they don't test the accessibility of a website, they know that this category exists. So this is why I chose Lighthouse. And also Lighthouse was kind of the easiest tool to trick because Lighthouse just uses a subset of Xcore, this engine that I mentioned earlier. There is another testing tool called XDevTools, which uses all the rules of Xcore, and it was just much harder to trick them. So I didn't bother with their tool. I just wrote this article specifically for Lighthouse. But when I prepared this talk, I thought, let's try. Let's see what happens if I run XDevTools. So again, in Chrome, I have the XDevTools extension installed in my browser. I switch to the tab and I run a test with their tool. And there's one issue, and it says page must have means to bypass repeated blocks. There is no valid skip link. So they complain about the skip link. A skip link is usually a hidden link that you can show if you use a tab key, and this key will allow you to skip certain parts on a page. So for example, if in your header there are a lot of links, like the navigation and social media links and the search and all kinds of interactive elements, you can put a link at the very top of the header element, which allows keyboard users or screen reader users to skip all these links and get directly to the content. So this is really useful. Most websites don't have it, but they should. And that's why XDevTools is complaining. So I will just add a skip link here. Adding a skip link to an element that doesn't exist because I don't believe that matters. I'm using CSS to hide the skip link because I don't want to distract users. And of course, I'm setting tab index to -1 to avoid issues with one of our earlier tests where we are using aria hidden. All right. Now let's try another tool. This tool is called Wave by WebAIM, and they also throw one error and they say there is a broken skip link. So Wave is a bit smarter than XDevTools because XDevTools just complains about the missing skip link, but Wave sees the skip link and it tells me, hey, there's a skip link, but it points to an element that doesn't exist. No problem for me. I will just put the ID for the skip link on the skip link itself. So it's referring to itself. Super useless, but this should be fine. So if I run another Wave test, 0 errors. So I just built a website that's perfectly inaccessible, but I get a perfect score in Lighthouse, 0 errors in XDevTools, and 0 errors in WebAIM. Yeah, and that's what I did. And I chose not just to do that, to do this experiment and to write this article. And the article contains a lot of middle finger emojis, and people really got upset about that, and also about my sarcastic tone. And I also chose to make this article, this talk, super sarcastic. And I did it for a reason, because I really want to highlight and to underline that testing with automated tools isn't enough. So just running one of these tests is not the last thing you do when you test accessibility, is the first thing. So if you run one of these tests and you get a perfect score in Lighthouse and 0 errors in DevTools, you are not done. This is where you start. So you've laid the groundwork, and then you start with the actual testing, which is manual testing with the keyboard, with screen readers, with all kinds of different software. This is what this article was about, and also this talk. And it was, again, not about these tools. I use all of them pretty much every day, or at least every week. They're great tools, and I really also have a lot of respect for the people who maintain these tools and who build them. I know some of them. These tools are fantastic. It's really just about me and you and how we test websites and how we interpret test results, especially. Yes, that's it. I hope that you have enjoyed this talk. I hope that you've learned something. I hope that I was able to explain also the kind of technical things to you. I hope that there wasn't too much sarcasm for you, because, you know, yeah, it's actually a sad thing, because most websites are just inaccessible. And yes, if you want to learn more about the things that I did, or if you actually want to, you know, take your time and read it again and just have enough time to actually understand the things that I did, you can check the article out on my website. It's titled as this talk, Building the Most Inaccessible Site Possible with a Perfect Lighthouse Score. It's on my website. You can Google it or DuckDuckGo it or whatever, and we'll also put it in the Miro board. And yes. And if you want to learn how accessibility testing works, I have a workshop coming up with Smashing Magazine. I hope it's okay to make some promo here. I didn't ask before. It's in early April, starting on April 7th. There are 5 sessions, each 2.5 hours. So it works good with a typical working day. And yes, I will talk about automated testing with different tools, about manual testing using the keyboard and screen readers, and I will answer all your questions. So it's 12.5 hours, and usually I add some more, so it's pretty much like 15 hours of accessibility testing. And if you're interested, you can use the special discount code HOPE. You will be joining me and get 15% off of the regular price. That's it. Thanks a lot.